I'll make a few introductory remarks, but I first thought it would be great to have Nick Manousos, our associated co-host of this event, to tell us a little bit about where we are and about HSNY. So we'll hear from my great friend Nick first, then I'll come back with a few opening remarks, and then we'll start to hear from today's incredible speaker lineup that's waiting to educate us. Nick?
Welcome to another beautiful day here in New York, and welcome to the 2022 NAWCC Symposium. So my name is Nicholas Manousos. I'm the Executive Director of the Horological Society of New York, and I thought I'd mention to everyone a little bit about this building, about where we're seated today, where we're holding the symposium. So we're in the General Society building. It's the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. The General Society is a nonprofit organization, very similar to the Horological Society. We share some things in common. We both have libraries. We both offer classes. We both really focus on education, but we do it in different areas. So the General Society is focused on the building trades. Literally the people that built New York City. This is their organization, just like the watchmakers in New York, their organization is the Horological Society. But they happen to own this entire beautiful building and this massive historic library, and we use it very frequently for our monthly lectures. So you may have seen me on YouTube introducing a speaker, and this is where we have our lectures every month here in New York. The General Society was founded in 1785, so I think that makes it 237 years. Is that correct? I'm not sure. I was just looking on their website. I don't know if they've updated that. So very old organization, even older than the Horological Society. This library that we're in today was opened in 1820, and it is now the second oldest library in New York City. It's older than the New York Public Library, you know, the library with the two lions out front. So it's a historic landmark library, and today it's still functioning as a private library for members of the General Society, and it's very frequently used for events because it's just a beautiful space. Other things to remember while you're here, just upstairs on the mezzanine level, we have the John Mossman Lock Collection. That's a small museum that is put together, organized by the General Society. You all are welcome to go up and take a look at it. There are two cabinets up there that will be of particular interest to everyone here. They're full of time locks. So locks with mechanical timing mechanisms inside them. Very interesting to see. So you go out to the lobby and head up those stairs, and you can check out the mezzanine. And I will turn on the lights after we get started. Other things too. I guess there's a question. What's the subject of the books here in the General Society? If you're looking around the stacks, maybe you're curious. It's mostly general purpose, and then also somewhat of a trend towards mechanics and tradespeople type of books. So that's what you'll see here. They've got stacks going all the way up here to my left and to the right, and that's the rare book section. It's climate controlled over there, so it's a huge library. I think they've got about 100,000 titles here. Speaking of libraries, last night we opened the Joost Berge Research Library at the Horological Society of New York. And Furtwangen he was the man of the night. We honored him in his incredible donation to HSNY. And I would encourage everyone here to go upstairs and visit the library while you're here in New York. It's open all day today. Our librarian just arrived. She's upstairs right now. All of the lectures you're going to hear today are brilliant. They're amazing. But maybe if there's one you want to take a break and skip it, go upstairs and check out our library upstairs. Just go out to the lobby, take the elevator up to the 5th floor, and Miranda will be there to welcome you. We've got a fantastic exhibit right now on James Arthur, some of his old watches, and we've got 25,000 titles upstairs. It's one of the largest specialized horological libraries in the world. It's in this building. Okay, is that it? Anything did I miss anything?
The business about skipping a speaker, yeah.
Oh, forget I said that. Only go during lunch or in between.
Nick, can we join the society? How does one?
Absolutely.
Is it possible?
Thank you for mentioning that, Jonathan. So anyone is welcome to join the Horological Society of New York. You don't need to be in New York. We have many thousands of members all over the world. And to join, just visit our website, hsny.org. That's it. All right. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Bob and enjoy the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nick. Nick has become one of my best friends, if not my best friend, and the more we work together on this event too, it just cemented what's been a wonderful opportunity for me to get to know one of the greatest guys in the world, except for all the rest of you, of course. So, anyway, I have some prepared remarks, just introductory, just things I should say before we get started. Of course, turn your phones off. That's always a good room. Nick told us about the wonderful room we've been in. At the beginning, when I was thinking about this idea some years ago, the idea first was, why don't we call it "Thank You for Collecting"? But we thought that was a little too flippant, maybe not specific enough. But that's really what this is about too: is looking back in time as if those 200 plus collectors were still alive, and we're trying to thank them for that. When I do the quick introductions of the speakers, it's not that I don't want you all to know how important they are, but their full biographies are in the program, they're on the website, and I don't want to steal the time from them when we're here to hear them, not hear me tell about them. So that's my point here too. As you've already noticed, there's a bunch of English and other accents here, and just notice that this truly is an international event, and I'm extremely grateful that wonderful, important people from overseas have decided to join us here as well. And all these lectures are being recorded, and once we get them organized, they'll be available to stream online in case you have dozed off or left, as Nick suggested, during any of them too. As you may recall, if you've been to other ones, there's no Q&A sessions during their talks. I don't want to, again, steal time from our speakers who we've come to hear. All the speakers are here for the duration. You're welcome to engage them in private conversation at any other time, but we'll just move through all the speakers without audience. As I mentioned last night, we're not offering any refreshments or snacks here in the middle of Midtown New York. During lunch, certainly one block up is West 45th, but there's a lot of eating places. You might have already discovered them for yourself. So you're not in an oasis here or a desert at all. There's plenty to find upstairs. And finally, as I've talked about with Fortunat, he continues to add to his database of important books. It was 23,000 something when he made his generous donation to the library upstairs. And he's alerted me to the fact that we've now approached 25,000. And he kind of worked it out so that the 25,000 on the 25,000 entry is the General History of Horology book. Right. So, so once that happens, I'm promoting the heck out of this class. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. So we've just, Fortunat had the brilliant idea to work that out. So this is number 25,000, and we're sure that's how many of these will sell. Once I'm done beating the drum for this too. And finally, before I make the introductions, I'm sure all of you have picked up the program. I've printed a number of these. If you need to take a second one to share with your chapters or with friends at home, please do so. This is really a book that I wrote for this event that's full of short bios about our collectors. And I continually update the database of these collectors on the website on the Great Collectors page, where I have PDFs of the same of this same database, but I continue to add people and make corrections. And if any of you diaries soon, I'll put your names in there too. So make sure your executor knows that should happen. Yeah, you're probably perhaps enjoying, but wondering why this picture of JFK is up there at making a speech at a Democratic convention. And it's because it's a little hard to see from here, but right there's a clock on the podium. So even JFK had to be aware of how long he was talking and when he needed to stop talking. I will be rigorous with my speakers about trying to keep on schedule. I think they already know that, so there shouldn't be any issue of anybody going on too long. But this is a reminder to all of us that, especially because we're horologists, we're going to stay on time, keep on time, and everybody's talk is going to be it's going to be wonderful and within the time constraints we establish, so that we get through the day smoothly. So the first speaker today. And I'm sure I've memorized this, but I don't want to make any mistakes at all. I've had Johannes Graf at our Dearborn seminar in 2018. He's the longtime curator of the Clock Museum in Furtwangen. I mangled the pronunciation, I'm sure, in the Black Forest. But of course, it's one of the premier clock museums in Germany. And he's become a good friend. He did a great talk on German car clocks when we were in Dearborn in 2018. And when I asked if there was a way that he could come and if there was something he could speak about, he immediately realized that he should speak about the great early collector that he's going to tell us about, who was kind of a groundbreaker and important and different from the collectors at the time that he was living and collecting. So please welcome Johannes Graf from Germany.
Yes, thank you very much for that warm welcome, and I'm very glad to be here, and I hope you be astonished that there have been forest collectors since about 170 years. Our museum started with forest clocks in 1850s, and private collectors, they started with Oskar Spiegelhalder about 40 years later. Okay, but first I have to start my presentation. Okay. Here? Yeah.
Yeah, how about the slide?
Okay, you see here, presentation was at the Nuremberg Horological exhibition in 1905, and that are some clocks from the Spiegelhalder collection. I will come back later to that war. But first, let me start with a personal memory. In 2013, I was able to attend the excellent NAWCC Symposium, Time for Everyone, Pasadena, as an audience member. It was an impressive experience for me. Those of you who were there will probably have fond memories of it as well. After the presentations, there was still time to visit the nearby art collection of railroad magnate Henry E. Huntington. Undoubtedly, the most famous painting in the collection is an art historically significant portrait, Blue Boy, by English painter Thomas Gainsborough. When sold to Huntington in 1921, the painting fetched the highest price paid for a work of art up to that time. Despite massive protests, the portrait was able to leave England the following year. Exactly 100 years later, the legendary painting returned to London's National Gallery this spring on loan. It triggered a veritable hype. In just 3 weeks, 90,000 visitors saw it. Some even came to the museum in blue costumes. But long before the spectacular sale to Huntington, Blue Boy was already considered a masterpiece of English portrait painting. And this brings me to the subject of my talk, Oskar Spiegelhalder. Around 1890, the 27-year-old Oskar Spiegelhalder had a costume tailored in blue silk, so that he could appear as a blue boy at the next ball. And he could be sure that in his circles, people would understand this allusion to the famous English painting. Even then, the Black Forest was not an untouched mountain landscape far from civilization. Located close to the border with Switzerland and France, the region had been in intellectual and economic exchange with whole Europe for centuries. This can also be seen in the collecting activities of Oskar Spiegelhalder. With Black Forest clocks, he chose a subject of the region where he has grown up, but was in close contact with the leading collectors and experts at home and abroad. I would like to figure out that this strategic approach allowed him to dominate the image of clock production in the Black Forest for over 100 years. Okay, that's my outline. I've forgotten to translate Gliederung into outline. In the next 40 minutes, I'd like to tell you first some basic points of his life. Then I will shortly talk about Horology's collecting around 1900 and what was Spiegelhalder's interest in horology. After that, I like to tell about the big exhibition of clocks and watches at Nuremberg in 1905, focused on Spiegelhalder's presentation of Black Forest clocks. At last, I like to answer the question, what makes Spiegelhalder a brilliant collector? Who was Spiegelhalder? Spiegelhalder was born on October 15, 1864 in the small town of Lenzkirch in the southeastern part of the Black Forest. His father, Josef Spiegelhalder, held an executive position at the Aktiengesellschaft für Uhrenproduktion in Lenzkirch, the most successful clock factory in the Black Forest until the end of the 19th century. The Spiegelhalder family belonged to the wealthy citizens of the region, so it was natural that the children received piano and drawing lessons as well as private lessons in French. Oskar Spiegelhalder attended prestigious schools in Freiburg and Stuttgart. These schools prepared him for later work as a merchant. For Oskar Spiegelhalder was to follow in his father's footsteps. During his apprenticeship, he spent long periods abroad with business partners in Paris and London. In 1886, he began working in sales at the Lenzkirch clock factory, where he soon rose to the position of sales manager. During numerous business trips, he regularly visited European cities. He appreciated the wide range of cultural activities offered there. He went to art exhibitions and museums, visited theaters and opera houses, but also variety shows and circuses. Many of the tickets are still in his estate today. From 1893, Spiegelhalder served on the board of the corporation. From 1908 to 1909, he was even director of the factory. For health reasons, he retired as early as 1909. Spiegelhalder died in his native town of Lenzkirch on September 17, 1925. Watch and clock collecting in Germany around 1900. Before World War I, collectors' view of the history of horology was still very narrow. Two influential contemporaries defined what kind of timekeepers were collected and what were not. One was Karl Marfels, in his main profession board member of the German Horological Association and publisher of an influential horological journal. The other was Ernst von Bassermann-Jordan, son of an important champagne producer. Bassermann-Jordan published the first handbook for horology's collectors in German language in 1914, and perhaps the first in the world. I do not know if there have been any others. Marfels and Bassermann-Jordan agreed that only the top achievements of craftsmanship were worth collecting. And these masterpieces had to be older than 100 years, so the youngest ones have been from 1800, collected around 1900. But there were also serious differences between the opinions of the two spokesmen. Marthels claimed that the value of a watch was primarily determined by a high-quality case. Less important, he said, was whether the movement was original or whether it had been replaced later. For Ernst von Wassermann-Jordan, on the other hand, the quality of case and movement was equally important. Under no circumstances should one buy watches with a high-quality case that do not also contain an exquisite movement. From all other watches, one should basically leave the fingers. In this regard, von Wassermann-Jordan writes, "The collector will all the more rarely experience pleasure in pure curiosities, such as timepieces made entirely of glass, wood, or ivory, because they usually tend to be overpaid, despite being very ugly." Spiegelhalder did not care for Wassermann-Jordan's devaluations of clocks made entirely of wood, as they had traditionally been built in the Black Forest. Spiegelhalder was thus an outsider among clock collectors in his day. But through this unusual field of collecting, he was able to open up a still unknown terrain and make a lasting impression. Something that Marthels and Wassermann-Jordan were not able to achieve to the same extent in the field of classical horology. On his travels, Spiegelhalder visited a lot of different museums. He became particularly interested in European ethnology and everyday culture. Spiegelhalder, around 1890, he began to collect himself. Over the next decades, Spiegelhalder collected many thousands of everyday objects from his homeland, from traditional clothing to home decor to various handicraft products. You see it here too in the pictures from his private museum. So Spiegelhalder was not a clock collector in the strict sense, but within the collection, Black Forest clocks took an important position in terms of numbers and content. Due to this interest in the material tradition of the Black Forest, Spiegelhalder looked at clocks in a completely different way than other collectors such as Marthels or Wassermann-Jordan. For him, clocks did not have to be masterpieces of craftsmanship, but authentic documents of everyday culture. This new view also affected the way he built up his collection. Most watch collectors bought from dealers or traded pieces among themselves. In contrast, Spiegelhalder was a true collector in a literal sense. He did field research even on the farms of the Black Forest to find interesting things or acquire them through personal relationship. But of course, he also used the usual channels, especially on his business trips. He bought old clocks through professional antique dealers. Okay, that's wrong here. That's this one. Fully committed to the model of scientific ethnology, he carefully documented each piece. One example you see here, that's a file card and photographs of glass paintings. When cataloging, information about the provenance and acquisition was also written down. In addition, at least one photograph was taken exceptional for those times. Due to the good documentation, Spiegelhalder's collections are still a unique treasure of information on the history of the Black Forest. In addition to this systematic approach, Spiegelhalder is distinguished by the fact that he thought early on about preserving his collections as a whole. After experts recognized the quality of the pieces and the documentation too, Spiegelhalder was able to sell first collection of 1,200 pieces to the Augustiner Museum in Freiburg in 1896. To this day, Spiegelhalder's collection there forms the core of the heritage of the Black Forest. After the sale, he started a new collection. This second collection of over 1,300 pieces was purchased by the state of Baden in 1909. Many pieces are still exhibited today in the National Museum of Baden in Karlsruhe Palace. His third collection, and now I go back, could be seen in his private home during the following years. Here's a poster from 1913 with an explanation also in English. Unique representation of the life, thought, art and industry of the Black Forest peasant in the various phases of their development during the last 2 centuries. A storehouse of instruction and entertainment for visitors to the Black Forest. This collection, including his important private library and scientific estate, went to the Franziskaner Museum in Villingen-Schwenningen after his death. It was very clever to sell his collections to the most important museums of the region, because whoever would deal with the history of the Black Forest in future would inevitably come across his collections. I would like to reassure you. I will not now look at the more than 5,000 pieces of you, especially since only the smallest part of them are clocks. Rather, I will limit myself to the historical clock exhibition 1905 in Nuremberg, where Spiegelhalder showed about 80 clocks. It was an event of superlatives, the largest and most comprehensive exhibition of old timepieces in Germany up to that time. The occasion was an anniversary. 400 years earlier, in 1505, Peter Heinlein would have invented the pocket watch at Nuremberg. Many consider this story to have been proved long ago, or at least questionable, since it is not clear what kind of timepiece Peter Heinlein really built in 1505. 400 years later, in the age of nationalism and imperialism, people did not want to know about such doubts. In 1905, Peter Heinlein was celebrated as a German genius in order to emphasize Germany's merits in the field of watchmaking over its neighbors in the West, first and foremost England and France, which is, of course, completely absurd. To back up this claim, a monument to Heinlein was made and ceremoniously unveiled. As part of the festivities, a historical exhibition also opened on July 1st, 1905. There, the most important collectors from Germany, from the German-speaking countries, showed their treasures. First and foremost, Karl Marfels. I already mentioned him as a spokesman for watch collectors. He exhibited there his important collection of 88 watches with emphasis on animal clocks of the Renaissance, enamel clocks, sorry, nothing had to do with animals, of the Renaissance and the Baroque. 4 years after Nuremberg, he was to sell this collection to the US banker and collector J.P. Morgan for the then enormous sum of $360,000. In 1970, the son of the banker gave the former Marfels collection to the Metropolitan Museum. Some of that splendid watches are still on display there, and some of you have seen them yesterday. Marfels was not only represented at this exhibition with his watches, but also showed the legendary 3 androids by Pierre-Jacques Dreux, the scribe, the piano player, and the draughtsman. To this day, they are among the most fascinating technical masterpieces of the 18th century. He was able to sell them, these unique pieces, also in 1909. Today they are shown in the Museum of Art and History at Neuchâtel, Switzerland. Ultimately, the The exhibition was a good opportunity for Marvels to get publicity for the sale of his collection. For contemporaries, this mixing of interest does not seem to have been a problem. Several other collectors also made it clear in the exhibition catalogue that their watches were for sale. Spiegelhalder's personal copy of the exhibition catalogue proves that the collectors were mostly present in person at Nuremberg. It contains autographs that have been collected during the banquet after the ceremonial opening. Of course, also Karl Marfeld's sign. However, not only historical timepieces were on display at the exhibition. In Nuremberg, many important watch and clock companies also showed their current products. This industrial fair certainly took up a much larger space than the actual exhibition of old clocks and watches. Probably the greatest interest at the watch fair was the then most complicated pocket watch in the world from the Saxon watch manufacturer Dürrstein, or Union. Union's Universaluhr, that means universal watch, was offered for the fabulous price of 12,000 marks, which was roughly the equivalent of 9 pounds of gold. For that, you got a watch with split seconds chronograph and flyback hands, perpetual calendar, moon phase, minute repeater, grand and petite sonnerie, and jumping seconds, as well as an alarm. We have seen that Karl Marfers used the Nuremberg exhibition for marketing his collection. So did Spiegelhalder. But Spiegelhalder went far beyond Marfers. I will show that he was a true marketing genius. He succeeded not only in selling his own collections at a profit, but also in making his mark on the entire field of Black Forest clock collecting for more than half a century. His presentation of the history of clocks in the Black Forest lasted until the 1980s. It was only then that newer research recognized for the first time that Spiegelhalder had been mistaken in central points. But before I go into that, I would like to give a brief history of the cottage industry in the Black Forest. Okay. The early history of the Black Forest clock making was already known around 1900. The first clockmakers settled down there in the middle of the 17th century. Due to the Spanish War of Succession, however, it took until 1730 for the craft to become permanently established. But wooden clocks existed not only in the Black Forest, but in many regions of Central Europe, and of course also in England and the United States. As we know today, the area of their manufacture in Central Europe stretched from Brandenburg in the north to the Alps in the south, from Bohemia in the east to France in the west. Wooden clocks were built from the Middle Ages until the 19th century, mainly for legal reasons. For anyone who wanted to make clocks or other things out of metal had to be a member of a city guild. The others were forbidden to do so. But it were not only the people in the city who needed craftsmen, but also those in the countryside. Therefore, the authorities determined that everything having been built out of wood was a free trade. So everyone was allowed to make clocks from wood. Okay. In most regions, there were only a few workshops that built a small number of wooden clocks for the local area. Unlike the Black Forest, around 1840, there have been around 1,000 workshops producing around 600,000 clocks a year. The Black Forest was the market leader in wall clocks in Europe. In the first half of the 19th century, about 1 in 3 clocks sold in Europe came from Black Forest. In total, About 30 million wooden clocks were sold during this period. There were two main reasons for this incredible success. Firstly, the Black Forest simplified production by means of new types of tools. Secondly, and this was probably decisive, there was a certain division of labor. As early as around 1780, clockmakers in the Black Forest got many individual parts from suppliers. These suppliers were able to work much faster than a clockmaker due to specialization. Okay, difficult word. And the result was astounding. Around 1750, a clockmaker still needed a week to make a wooden clock. By 1780, 30 years later, it took only 1 day. This saving in working time made wall clocks practically cheaper. For the first time, poor people, such as small farmers and workers, could afford a clock. The success throughout Europe was supported by the fact that the Black Forest took over the distribution of the clocks itself. Wholesalers in the Black Forest purchased the clock and shipped them by wagon and ship, later by railway, to all countries in Europe. The clocks were then sold by peddlers from the Black Forest. This success story was known long before Spiegelhalder started collecting Black Forest clocks. But Spiegelhalder was the first to find the clocks to match this story. For until the end of the 19th century, most non-fiction books haven't had any illustrations. With his collections, Spiegelhalder could define for the next generations what a Black Forest clock looked like. He provided a pool for wooden clocks that were depicted in the 20th century in the now illustrated books on Black Forest clocks. How Spiegelhalder saw the development of Black Forest clocks from their beginnings to the middle of the 19th century is what I like to figure out now, based on his stand at the 1905 clock exhibition. So, come back to this wall here. Only one stand of the Nuremberg exhibition was featured in the contemporary press, the presentation of Spiegelhalder's collection. In doing so, he did not exclusively display the most precious top-of-the-line pieces, as other collectors did, but chose clocks that were the best suited to tell the story of Black Forest clockmaking. Significantly, Spiegelhalder was awarded a silver medal for his tangible history of the Black Forest clock industry. In Nuremberg, Spiegelhalder confidently used the possibilities of grouping the clocks to convey his view on clock history. 3 sections can be seen on the exhibition wall. In the center was the most magnificent object in the collection, a monumental mechanical automata and musical instrument. The left side of the wall showed the historical development of Black Forest cottage industry. The right side was dominated by rare varieties, music clocks, clocks with moving figures, or very small wooden clocks. The presentation was framed by 2 imposing flute organ clocks. Let's take a closer look at the left side of the exhibition wall. From top to bottom, it shows the technical and aesthetic development of Black Forest wooden clocks in 3 phases. In the first phase, movements with the foliage were made in Black Forest. In the second phase, clocks with a verge and a short front panel were made during the second half of the 18th century. From 1780, clocks with lever escapement, or hook escapement, and long pendulum have been introduced in a third phase. For the collector, the historical development of clock technology was also reflected in the design of the dials. Spiegelhalder meant the the clocks of the first phase to be characterized by wooden faces. They were painted in the Passion manner or were covered with a printed paper shield. Following this, in a second phase, dials made of glass would have been used. In a third phase, lacquered shields dominated the market for Black Forest clocks during the 19th century. This chronological sequence of escapements in wooden clocks seems conclusive at first glance. After all, this development can also be observed in metal clock movements in the 17th and early 18th century. From the foliate or balance escapement to verge and front pendulum, and then to lever escapement and long pendulum. This explanation made sense to contemporaries around 1900 because of the legendary success of Darwin's theory of evolution. They were used to applying the principle of the survival of the fittest to the history of technology as well. For example, Adolf Kistner wrote in the introduction to the Furtwangen Museum's inventory catalogue in 1925, the genetic idea promoted by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is leading the way for technical museums today. This idea of quasi-natural technical development from an inaccurate to a precise clock also underlies Spiegelhalder's collection. In doing so, however, he was subject to a double error. By no means all wooden clocks were actually built in the Black Forest. Bertolt Scharf was able to show in his reference book on wooden wheel clocks from 1986 that in many areas of Europe different designs existed. In addition, Scharf has made clear that at the beginning of the 19th century in Central Europe, clocks with foliate have been made next to those with verge escapement, but also those with anchor escapement were built. This phenomenon could be described as the simultaneity of the non-simultaneous, in the words of the philosopher Ernst Bloch. Spiegelhalder, as a pioneer of Black Forest clock collectors, could not have known this yet. He was not aware that wooden clocks of different construction did not show the stages of technical development in the Black Forest, but rather regional differences. Consequently, he mistakenly attributed some clocks to the Black Forest and also dated them incorrectly. Here are two examples from the clock wall at Nuremberg. First phase. Let's first take a look at the clocks that Spiegelhalder believes to be the earliest Black Forest clocks because of their foliate or balance escapement. Above is a detail from the black and white photo of the exhibition wall. Below are contemporary photos of the same clocks that are now in the National Museum in Karlsruhe. The large clock with the automata on the left was probably made very early, around 1750, but definitely not in Black Forest, probably Bavaria. Spiegelhalder's error becomes clearer with the wooden clock on the right. The wooden clock is signed by the clockmaker Josef Lazar, who built this kind of clock still at the beginning of the 19th century near Salzburg. Second example. According to Spiegelhalder, wooden clocks with verge escapement and front pendulum emerged in the Black Forest from the mid-18th century. The earlier paper dial had been replaced by a glass dial. However, Spiegelhalder also showed clocks for the second phase that were not built in the Black Forest. They came from the Bavarian forest, the border region between Bavaria and Bohemia. The clocks were also made in the first third of the 19th century. At that time, anchor escapement and long pendulum had long since become established in Black Forest clock production. In particular, his errors show how Spiegelhalder was able to influence the historiography of Black Forest clock making in the 20th century. Around 1900, he defined what could be considered a Black Forest clock. Until the late 20th century, most clock collectors and historians followed his meaning. It was crucial for this success that there had been no photographs of old wooden clocks before Spiegelhalder. He was the first to systematically produce high-quality photographs and to have them printed in the context of the Nuremberg exhibition. Over the next decades, authors uncritically depicted the very clocks that Spiegelhalder had specified as being typical for historical development. The thread runs from the first illustrated monograph on Black Forest clocks from 1927 to the opulently illustrated exhibition catalogue of 1995 of the Karlsruhe National Museum. I'd like to sum up what makes Spiegelhalder a brilliant collector. 3 points, in my opinion, make an outstanding collector in general. The high quality of objects, like Spiegelhalder's, the collections must contain outstanding pieces that are as original as possible. Second, an excellent documentation. As with Spiegelhalder, it must be possible to identify the origin of the individual clocks. Photos should document the condition at that time of acquisition and conservation or restoration measures. Third, preserving the collections. Spiegelhalder succeeded in selling his collections to museums during his lifetime, thus preserving them for posterity. I'm sure this first 3 points apply to quite a few of the clock collectors or horology collectors featured today. But I'm curious to know who among the other collectors has managed to influence the image of the timepieces they collect in the way Spiegelhalder has succeeded with the Black Forest.